opinions expressed on this program are those of the participants and do not reflect the views of BronxNet or the program underwriters.
BronxNet. Your voice, your views, your vision.
Good evening and welcome to BronxTalk. We have a lot to talk about with tonight's guest, the economy and jobs, the president's plan to spur the economy, recent environmental policy decisions, the election of a Republican in an historically Democratic seat in Queens, and much more. If you want to weigh in with questions or comments, then call into the show at 718-960-7241. You can also email comments to us at bronxtalk@hotmail.com, and we'll read those on the air during a future edition of our show. Please join me in welcoming the congressman from the 7th Congressional District, which includes part of Queens, all the way over there, and the Bronx communities of Soundview, Pelham Parkway, Morris Park, Van Nest, Allerton, Parkchester, Rocks Next, City Island, Silver Beach, and Carp City. Welcome back to Representative Joe Crowley. Thank you for joining us.
Thanks, Gary. Thanks for having me.
I mentioned to you on the just before the show, and I'll mention to our audience, this is your 7th appearance in our 17 years, and we appreciate every time you come.
Glad to be on. Thanks, Gary.
We have a lot to talk about, and let's start with the economy. You know, of course, it's the economy, stupid. When Congress signed off on the original Recovery and Reinvestment Act in 2009, many economists had said, well, you know what, it's not enough, and falling short won't invigorate the economy, and it was only a matter of time before more was going to be needed. In retrospect, do you look back now, especially with what the president had to do recently, and say, gee, maybe we kind of did it halfway the last time, we should have gone all the way the first time around?
Gary, when I look back now, I say, thank God we did what we did. Imagine where we would be today had we not done that. And there was great resistance, quite frankly, in the Congress to do that much. If I remember back then, we had control of the House and the Senate, but really the Senate is a 60-vote Senate. Even though the majority is Democrat, we have to get 60 votes to end cloture. And that bill went back and forth between both houses. Ultimately, you know, it's kind of interesting. We had passed a bill that was worth about $750 billion. The Senate then went and tagged on an additional $100 billion with a caveat when it came back to the House, it had to be no more than $700 billion. It was kind of an odd way of legislating where they get credit for adding things as long as we send it back to them with all those things cut. Look, in the end, I think people back then, reasonable economists, believed that that would have been enough to avoid a second dip and would have put us, get enough people back to work and stimulate the economy. I think it did work in terms of preventing 26,000 teachers from being laid off and police officers and firefighters here in New York City, just to give you one example. But I think we find ourselves in very difficult straits, not all caused by the situation here at home. We look at what's happening in Europe and the lack of faith within the euro and the European economy, and quite frankly around the world. It's been an unsettling time. We still find ourselves involved in 2 wars that have been unpaid for. Our national debt has continued to grow with the expansion, the blowout through the Medicare Part D program that helped to even further expand the debt that we have. So we're really grappling with a number of issues here all simultaneously. At the same time, I think that the key issue here is jobs. And since the Republicans took control, again, I don't want to be partisan, but since they've taken control, it's been over 250 days and not a single jobs bill has been brought to the floor, not a single jobs bill. And we're still waiting for that. And we hope the president's bill gets to the floor as soon as possible.
I guess the question, and you alluded to it when you talked about what's going on in Europe, and the notion of confidence is a fundamental concept. Going back and forth to Republicans and Democrats, and they'll hear a Democrat like you talking about, you know, the Republicans did this, and of course the other side will say, you know, what you and your colleagues are doing. And none of that, right or wrong, restores confidence. How do we restore the confidence in the American voters as well as the confidence in the people who have the money to spend, et cetera, that will inspire the economy. And I'll give you just one quick example. If you've got a moderately sized business and maybe you're not doing badly, you're surviving, and you might have a little bit of money to spend to hire somebody, but right now you're so concerned that it will go bad that you're not going to make that hiring of those 5 or 10 people to expand a certain area, and that's only because you don't have confidence in the system. How do we restore that confidence?
I think the first thing that has to be done, Gary, is you hit it on the head. I think the American people want to see us, Democrats, Republicans, the left and the right, come together, work together to pass something that's reasonable. This is not about American workers who are Republicans or Democrats or liberals or conservatives. This is about getting America on the right path forward. I think not only on this as it pertains to the president's jobs plan, but quite frankly, as it pertains to still the overriding issue is our national debt. And the president has called for this commission of 12 or super committee of 12 to actually accomplish something, get something to Congress that we can pass, and get something the president can sign into law. And I prefer to see that done in a grand bargain. What I don't want to see is that my colleagues on the other side continue to say, we're for a grand bargain, but we want to see cuts. We don't want to have any revenue on the table. And what I would suggest is that this is not about one side or the other. We're dealing with some very difficult times here in America, and we all need to contribute towards that. I think if you ask people across the board, especially lower rung, will they contribute to help get America back on the right path? And I think they will. We have to have everyone involved in that. Not about a shared sacrifice, because that's too difficult. It connotes negative. It's about shared responsibility. And I think the rich and the poor alike would like to help get America back on its feet. And it's going to take some difficult tasks, but I think we're up to doing that as long as we get that legislation through.
Hardline Democrats, especially the people who essentially elected Barack Obama in the first place, get frustrated because, frankly, they want to go even further on the other side and say, you know what, why didn't the president establish certain principles to begin with? Ask for more money, and I know you say you have to compromise, but if you present yourself as a compromiser, it shows a weakened position and also is almost the first step to losing what you may value.
But I think he did a good job.
Gone on the others, you think he
did a good job in this last, in introducing his recommendations to the Committee on 12. Where he clearly delineated between where we are, where he is as the president and his party is, in contrast with the Republicans are offering, which is just cuts, entitlement cuts to Social Security and to Medicare. What the president said, we may have to look at making adjustments to some of those institutions, but we're talking about a millionaire's tax. We're talking about the wealthy in this country paying their fair share to help get America, to get this ship of state righted. And in doing so, it'll be better for all of us, including them as well. I have a number of friends who live in the city who are blessed and make a great income. And they've said, you know what, I can contribute more. I can do more. I want to do more to help our country. I want our country to ask of me to do more. We didn't get here overnight, and I will say this to you as well. This wasn't just a Republican problem. Both parties contributed to this. And it's going to take compromise and both parties coming together, talking about where we can make legitimate cuts, but where also can we have legitimate revenues on the table to help us get through these tough times.
Why didn't the president make those kinds of statements at the get-go before 2009 and at that point and lay the groundwork that is what this principle is about, and I mean philosophical principle and economic principle, rather than have it kind of ultimately come out when he's almost forced. It's so obvious at this point that now he's come out with it.
To some degree, I think maybe the president thought this was all on the level. I'll be honest, and I'll talk to my Republican colleagues and the leaders in the House and the Senate and get some responsible answers back, but that wasn't happening. I think part of what you're seeing happen now is just out of pure frustration to some degree. But more importantly, I think because we're only 13 months away from the next election, it gives the American people an idea of where the sides fall, where people are falling. We've been in the House for almost over 9 months now. When Nancy Pelosi became Speaker, when George Bush was still President of the United States, in her first term as Speaker, we enacted into law over 350 bills. We're now over 9 months into this Congress, and we have passed into law less than 40 bills. we're just not doing. We're not producing as much. As I said to you before, over 250 days, and not a single jobs bill has been on the floor of the House of Representatives.
This is because of political differences in political ranking?
I quite frankly don't believe that the Republican leadership wants to give this president any victory at all, regardless as to how it helps the American people. I think that there are some on the other side who are putting their political victories, or the potential political victory, ahead of what's in the interest of the American people.
From a philosophical perspective, we know what the president proposed just a couple of weeks ago about a national jobs and infrastructure bank and all these ideas. Many people, and certainly there's people way on the other side from where you stand, who are in the Tea Party and others, and say, you know what, it's time for government to stop doing these things. We have to put enough infrastructure in so business will create these jobs, because the more we do it, it starts that cycle in the national debt spending again. Right. But what's your response to that?
Well, local business and business didn't create the Hoover Dam. It didn't create the interstate highway system. It didn't create the George Washington Bridge or any of the bridge or tunnel structures that we have in this country today. The infrastructure was built in cooperation with the American people and its government. And it has enhanced business, I think, in this country. Getting things we've taken for granted, getting products to market, getting corn to market. It doesn't happen by osmosis. It happens because we have built a system of rail, of roadway that needs to be nurtured. It's been neglected, and because it's neglected, we don't have as many people working as we should have. But we're also not setting the stage for the future. The American people, for years to come, need to have reliance that the system was created by government with the cooperation of its people is there for generations to come. So look, I understand that many of my colleagues on the other side believe there's too much government. And I think we can shrink a bit. I think there is room for that. But we need government. Government is a necessity. Government has been around since the creation of this country. And so it will continue to be in existence, whether anyone likes it or not. We need to have government.
Why not invest in green ideas? I mean, the president talks about the infrastructure, something like, let's say, a national recycling program or another green concept that could be connected to jobs and move us forward not only in the creation of jobs, the creation of a new industry, put all those people, or at least many of the people who are out of work, to work in different aspects of it, and of course help the environment at the same time.
Tens of thousands of people have been hired in green technology. That was a great portion of the monies dedicated in the Recovery Act towards green, solar, wind technologies, tidal technology for production of energy. So that happened. That has happened. It continues to happen. The question is, will we continue to invest in the future? And that's, Gary, it goes right to your point. Why do we need government? Because the private sector was not investing in those areas. The private sector was not investing enough in solar or in wind technology. It needs to have government involvement. That's what government's there for. Government is there to help stimulate growth and investment in entities where the private sector will not.
If you met with the president today, would you urge him to expand that notion, that concept?
I don't know if I have to meet with the president. I think he wants to expand that notion. I think he wants, we've seen more jobs in green energy developed over the last 2 years than we probably have had in decades. The solar energy technology was developed right here in the United States, except most of its production has taken place, 90% of its production has taken place outside of the country.
Environmentalists were shocked that the president caved in on the clean air rules that require states to reduce local air pollution. How do you and your Democratic colleagues feel about the president's position on that?
I think during these very difficult times in terms of job loss, anything the president would have done that would have further added more people to the jobless rolls would have been very, very difficult to do, especially for people who live in those, who work in those spheres. But what I will say is that the Clean Air Act and the Clean Water Act have been under attack by the Republicans in Congress ever since they've taken back control of the House of Representatives. So the real fight here is about maintaining the Clean Air Act. It's about maintaining the Endangered Species Act, and it's about maintaining the Clean Water Act.
But didn't the president, in essence, cave in on moving?
I don't think the president. I think look, there's going to be time to deal with those issues in the future. I think right now the time is not adding more people to the jobless rolls during a very, very difficult time in our country. There'll be an opportunity for the president, when reelected, to come back and address those issues in the future.
You, of course, in Queens and head of the Queens Party, the Queens Democratic Party. Was the election of Bob Turner in your home borough a referendum on the president?
Well, it's also, the district is split between Queens and Brooklyn. And not split entirely, about two-thirds in Queens.
Let's be clear, that district, not your district,
correct,
is Queens and the Bronx.
And I think there were a lot of anomalies that took place, a lot of issues, that a confluence of things that happened. You know, I would make a point that not many people have made, is that there was also a recent election in upstate New York, the 26th district, where Kathy Hochul was elected. The first time a Democrat had replaced a Republican in a special election. And we lost a seat here in New York City for the first time in almost 100 years, that we see a Republican now in a place where a Democrat had once held. I think it's a message to everyone in Washington that we don't like how things are going. We want to see you working together. You know, to have Republicans go out of the way to vote for a Democrat upstate, or Democrats downstate to go out of the way to vote for a Republican in New York City is unheard of. I think what the message is we want you all to work together. And I welcome Bob Turner to the Congress, and I want to work with them.
Were you surprised? Any regrets in how maybe you handled this? Did you take something for granted? I know the Daily News gave you a pretty hard time on saying, you know what, Joe Crowley took things for granted?
No, not at all. I think we did everything we could to ensure a victory for David Weprin. As I said, I think there were a confluence of issues that came together. I think the issue of Israel was an issue. I think David Weprin's position on gay marriage was an issue. I think the fact that, you know, in Queens we won 52-47 for Democrat, for Weprin, but in Brooklyn it went 67-33 for Mr. Turner. I think there's a change in terms of.
What you're suggesting there is your people came through.
No, they should have came in even more. Quite frankly, in a normal election, it's really a snapshot election. Not everyone who's eligible to vote is voting in these special elections. And I know there's also some discussion about, you know, there should have been a primary election. The reality is that under New York state law and under the U.S. Constitution, there is no primary. The Constitution is clear. The executive of the state will call the election. The only way there could have been a primary for this election is if the election were held over 17 months and happened next August or September. And then you'd have a vacancy.
So there was no way for you to step in and say, I'd rather not do this now or take a chance.
Exactly right.
Let's go to the telephone before we run out of time. Adam from Pelham Parkway calling in. Hello, Adam. Nice to see you.
Hi, how's it going, Gary?
We're doing fine. How are you? Go
Hi, Adam.
What do you got? Is he going to talk
Hello?
to us? Yes, go ahead.
All right, ready for my question?
Yes, go ahead. You got it. You have the floor.
All right, so my question for my congressman. How you doing, Congressman Crowley?
Good, how are you?
Adam asked the question.
Adam.
How's it going? So my question is, Congressman, how do you feel that you can, you know, spend sort of the necessary time and energy, you know, fighting our local issues in Washington, and also be the chair of a local party up here and sort of deal with the, you know, parochial local kind of issues, you know, that are involved with the county chairship?
Okay, so your question is about the congressman splitting his time as a quote-unquote politician and someone who heads a party, an important party in the Bronx, in the city of New York, and also, of course, represent your constituents properly. Thank you, Adam.
Adam, it's a great question. As I would say, is that I'm a partisan when it comes to elections. I believe very strongly in the Democratic Party and the issues that we stand for. Helping the middle class, helping the least amongst us give a step up to them. It's really, I think, in much the same sense that Franklin Delano Roosevelt was a Democrat, and Harry Truman and JFK, right down the line. But once elections are over, I think Adam probably read that one of the first things I did on the floor was shake Bob Turner's hand. In fact, I offered him a ride during the rain. You know, so I believe in partisanship when it comes to elections and being all out, but when it's over, it's over. I get along very well with Peter King and the other Michael Grimm, who are elected representatives from the people. And quite frankly, the system is working. Democracy at work. You know, only in America could you have a seat that's 3-to-1 Democratic turned Republican. And so I also think it keeps me in touch with my constituents and my people. My local politics is the vibrancy of knowledge and what's happening on the ground floor, so to speak. So, and I enjoy it very much as well.
One more question about that election. There's a lot of talk now that, well, it barely matters anyway. The district will be redistricted out. I guess now you would say, gee, I'd love to see that. Do you have any thoughts on the notion of that district disappearing?
You know, as I think was also a problem for our candidate, that everyone believed that the seat was going away, made it difficult to raise money, although he did a very good job of that and preparing for it. Quite frankly, I don't control that process. That's the state legislature and the governor. And we really don't know what the process is going to be, whether there'll be an independent commission, whether there'll be a partisan or nonpartisan commission.
What would you like to see, or at this point, is it obvious what you'd like to see?
Well, look, I mean, everyone honestly has a personal stake in this who holds office today. Quite frankly, I believe that if a federal master were appointed to draw districts, I think Democrats would do very, very well. And so I believe that I'll have a district to run in no matter what. I'm not that concerned about that. I think what's really more of concern is that the primary will not be in September of next year. The general will still be in November. The primary will have to be either in August, July, or June, in all likelihood June. So that is moving the process up much more quickly than anticipated. And the lines have not been drawn yet. We don't know what they look like, so we wait and see.
You mentioned the Middle East as being a factor in that election. We had another impasse in the Middle East with the UN and the members saying one thing about a Palestinian state and the president and the United States and Israel saying another.
Well,
I mean, are we now yet still doing this and not getting a solution?
It's probably representative of the fact that there has been no movement in peace talks or negotiations. And quite frankly, the people who I believe are responsible for no movement in peace talks are the same people who are pushing for a vote at the UN for the Declaration of Statehood. I think we all recognize it's the U.S. policy of a two-state solution for the issue of Israel and the people of the Palestinian Authority.
Do you think Israel believes that?
I think Israel believes that. I think majority of the people in Israel believe that. But the only way we're going to get to that solution is through negotiating. The Palestinian people and the PA getting the UN to declare a statehood will change absolutely nothing on the ground. That's the irony of all this. It really will just, in my opinion, create more distrust between the leaders within Israel and the leaders within the Palestinian Authority. What really needs to happen is they need to come to the table, not with Hamas, which is a known terrorist organization, but come to the table and deal with Israel in a straightforward way. I think the Israelis want to make a deal. It's not in their interest to have suicide bombers or to have homicide bombers blowing up buses in the middle of downtown Jerusalem, or to always be going to bed at night, whether or not they're going to be victims of terrorism.
And it's also not in anybody's interest to have them expanding their settlements in the West Bank.
Well, I think this all comes down to this: negotiation. Come to the table and talk about what your needs are. And there are needs on both sides of this issue.
Is drawing the lines back to 1967 a deal breaker? Or is that one of the things that could be on the table?
Look, I think when Israel, as a country unto itself, goes to negotiate with the Palestinian Authority, everything can be on the table. We, the United States, should not be dictating to the state of Israel, or quite frankly to the Palestinians, what they ought to be discussing. That is up to them to discuss and to work out at the negotiating table.
With Hillary Clinton at the center of it?
Well, I think that the U.S. can be a facilitator. I think the U.S. has credibility both within Israel and within the Palestinian Authority to help facilitate those negotiations. But you need willing partners. I believe the Israelis are willing to negotiate. I'm not so sure that that's the case on the other side.
We of course, will never have enough time because we'll just keep going, but we are at some point going to get to the end of the show. Essentially, the last subject I want to get to brings us back to our shores here, and there's a big education summit right now at Rockefeller Center. From a philosophical perspective, do we have too much emphasis on testing in our schools, and would you advise Arne Duncan and the president to say, you know what, that may be a core issue that we ought to relook at?
It was a big part of the Leave No Child Behind Act, and that was to basically have an understanding as whether or not what we're doing in schools is working or not. I was recently having a conversation with my wife about our own children, and you know, the competition to get into the best schools or to get a scholarship, et cetera, et cetera. And my emphasis with her was that I want my child and our children to be well-rounded. I want them to be educated, but also have an understanding of the surroundings. And, you know, in many respects, gearing children just towards testing does not ensure that they're going to have a full and enriched education. I think you have to have some standards, though, by which to judge whether or not teachers are performing and whether or not students are performing.
So are we going in the wrong direction?
Well, I think right now the test is still out. The case is still out and hasn't been made either way. I think we're looking for a balance between be able to judge whether or not they're getting the information they need to know and need to have, and whether or not they're getting that full, well-rounded education.
Folks, I know Jane will put up the phone number for your office, although we were talking earlier about how anybody could find you anyway. Just Google the name Joe Crowley, the office, all the information will show up.
Good and bad, right?
And I've got to ask this question because it was revealed on our show a number of years ago. You've been playing the guitar lately?
Not as much as I'd like.
Have you been playing at all?
I have a little bit with my kids every so often.
Play with the kids, all right.
I actually cut a record. I'm going to get it to you by the
Really?
Grammy Foundation.
A new one?
Yeah, the Grammy Foundation. We did it with professionals, really to teach Congress about what really goes into making music. And
now,
really,
why would Congress need to know what
well,
goes
because
into,
when it
there's
comes
a lot of things Congress needs to know.
when it comes to intellectual property rights and how musicians and how songwriters actually make their living, given the nuances of the change in the industry, you know, CDs are out, but you know, iPads, iPhones are in, and how do they gain gainful employment by that? Performance rights. Well, the performers on these albums and records should be paid as well.
So there's the colliding of your worlds.
It's a big export of the United States, one of our largest exports.
And you feel like because of your interest in music, you would be in the center of that dialogue.
I think with my background in recording as well has helped. Yeah.
Congressman Joe Crowley, we look forward to the 8th time that you appear.
Thanks,
on our
Gary.
show.
I look forward to it as well.
Folks, if you have further comments or questions on anything you heard on tonight's show or anything going on in the Bronx, then email them to us at BronxTalk@hotmail.com. And we'll read those on the air during a future edition of our program. Archives of Bronx Talk available at BronxNet.org. You click Bronx Talk on the right-hand navigation bar toward the bottom. We'll see you next Monday night and every Monday night at 9 for Bronx Talk. Special thanks to producer Jane Folloro, director Sean Lilly, Dina, and our cast of thousands who are around us up in the booth and here and there. And to you, good night. Thank you.
Weight loss, it's one of the many ways to fight osteoarthritis pain. For more information on managing pain, go to fightarthritispain.org.
Be free. Nice, Dad. Nice, Dad. Nice, Dad.
Charles!
Nice, Dad.
You don't have to be perfect to be a perfect parent. There are thousands of siblings in foster care who'll take you just as you are.